Hello and welcome to After Scientology, Straight Up and Vertical, the weekly show where Tony Ortega and I break down what happened in Scientology last week, thoughts and ideas about that. Tony, welcome to the show.
Hey, Chris, how you doing?
It has been a week and a weekend. So many things went down. Why don't we kind of take them one by one, walk through some stuff. First off, biggest thing, of course, still Danny Masterson's trial. The jury is now in deliberations, but closing arguments began the week. Thoughts?
It was just really remarkable this time. I mean, the biggest change from the first trial was that it was Deputy DA Reinhold Mueller for the government that did both the first part of the government's closing statement and then also the rebuttal after defense attorney Philip Cohen. This time, they split duties, and Deputy DA Ariel Anson started the government's closing, and she really knocked it out of the park. I mean, my biggest complaint after the first trial was that the government didn't really put together a really compelling narrative for the jury. It didn't tell them a story, which I feel like people need.
Yep.
Her first statement was, "It all starts with a drink." And right from there, she was telling a story about Danny Masterson allegedly drugging and raping all these women. And let me tell you, a lot of people probably saw my notes, but if you were there in the courtroom, I can tell you she was doing such a good job. She was so compelling, such an interesting narrative. And then she weaved together all the facts in the case about what these individual women had been through. And yeah, she did her best to try to anticipate what Cohen was going to do on defense. She would say, like, now the defense wants you to think that this is all a grand conspiracy, right? And then she would go into that. So she was trying not only to give the jury a compelling narrative, but also to anticipate where the attacks were going to come from. Yeah. So I don't know. I mean, she's the shortest person in the courtroom, but she had us all in the palm of her hand and really delivered a compelling statement. Philip Cohen came on next. Philip Cohen is very good at what he does. He did not disappoint. He went after the same things he usually does, which is he looks at things that these women said in interviews like in 2017 versus what they're saying on the stand today and pointing out what things might have changed. Now, I think the women this time did a very good job addressing why some of those things might be different and why they might have more details today. But, you got to hand it to him. He's good at, making it sound like these are problems and these women are embellishing things. That's his job. That's just how you work a case like this, right?
Yep.
And I thought he made a couple of missteps, though. He tried to make the case that there was no force in some of these incidents.
Oh, yeah, that was bizarre, actually, that came out.
Yeah, he I guess what he wanted the jury to think was that these incidents were a lot less horrible than these women were saying now, and at the time they were consensual, and that the women were adding details to turn it into forcible rape. But then, in his rebuttal, Deputy DA Mueller had the last word, and he came on and just destroyed that and saying, with Jane Doe 1, the fact that, she tried to push a pillow at him. He put the pillow back in her face, smothered her till she passed out. She then tried to reach for him. He reached down, held her arms out with one hand, and choked her neck with the other. If that's not force, what is? I mean, he really made it clear that there's no question that force was involved in these incidents, according to how these women described it. And so I thought Cohen made a bit of a misstep there. And then the other thing was Jane Doe 2 at one point had described how after this whole awful attack was done, he went to the bathroom and brought back a towel to clean her up. Right. And she said the way she described it was he was acting as if he was a gentleman after this horrible treatment. And Cohen, again, wants the jury to think that, no, these weren't that bad. These women are adding elements, and if he was acting like a gentleman, maybe he was a gentleman, right?
Yeah, I thought that was a real slimy thing to say, to be honest. I read that and went, what?
Well, Mueller really made him pay for that on his rebuttal, because he went through a litany, when he was pushing the pillow down on Jane Doe 1's face. Was he being a gentleman then? When he put his hand around her throat and squeezed, was he being a gentleman then? And he just went through that litany for all these different examples. I thought it was, it was the kind of thing that made you feel like maybe Cohen had screwed up. Okay.
Mhm.
So I just have to say, all in all, between Ariel Anson and Reinhold Mueller, these DAs not only put on a better case this time, they wrapped it up about as good as I think they could have. They really did a strong job over Tuesday and then part of Wednesday. So then the jury had it, Chris, and
Yeah.
we're back to the waiting game. I mean, the first thing I'll point out is that they went through all of Wednesday and half of Thursday without a peep. And the first trial, we already had a question from the jury on the first day.
Right.
So I thought that was a positive sign. It indicated to me maybe this jury is moving along, figuring things out. But then we did have our first question on Thursday afternoon, which they decided to deal with Friday morning. And that was they wanted to play back the video of Jane Doe 3 being interviewed by Detective Reyes in Austin in 2017.
Right.
When I reported that, Chris, what was your reaction to what that might mean to you?
Well, honestly, and even right now as I sit here, all I can think of is it could mean so many different things. I dare not even let myself guess because I don't want to. Because honestly, I just don't know. It could be problems with her story, of course. It could be inconsistencies. It could be, wait a minute, was she questioned badly? Let's look into that. I mean, there's so many approaches to why you'd want to watch that video, and it could be any of them. So,
It could be, and I did point out a couple of responses Friday morning from people to how it might be seen as a positive thing. I'll add to that one more observation. I was sitting next to a very veteran court reporter Friday morning before that started and asked her about it, and because she's been through so many more cases than I have. And she said that she has seen situations where the jury asked to rewatch a video or read back testimony in the morning and come up with a verdict in the afternoon.
Mm-hmm.
So that she really doesn't think we should read into whether it's indicating of either way. And so I thought that was really important.
Yeah.
Then after that, so that rewatch of the video was Friday morning. And then a little bit later, almost just before lunch on Friday, another question. And the court only told us that it had been taken care of. Right. So I'm thinking it's maybe something like in the first trial, for example, the jury asked to be given copies of the police reports, and the judge said, no, you don't get those, they're hearsay. So I'm thinking it's something like that, where the jury asked for something that the judge was able to take care of without calling all the attorneys back to court.
Got it.
And they're not going to tell us what it was until the next time they're on the record. Right. So whatever that was on Friday morning, it's done. It's taken care of. So they went ahead and deliberated the rest of Friday afternoon. They quit a little bit early, but 3 days, no indication of where they're going. Right. They'll be back on Monday, and we just have to wait and see.
Yeah, and it's obviously everybody's, as I've been saying in my other shows and stuff, everybody's on pins and needles right now. This is just like nail biter central. And I want to say not only because of the vast amount of investment we have in these women getting justice, which is always the primary here. But let's be honest, there are also other factors at play here. The civil case, this grand jury rumored to be going on for years now. Maybe that's hanging fire on a success like this, or maybe it's not. Who knows? It's not that we can know all this stuff. We just know this is important, and we really want this to happen. And justice for these victims.
And let me just add, you brought that up, the justice for the women. Reinhold Mueller, his rebuttal to finish the closing argument for the government started on Tuesday afternoon and finished on Wednesday morning. And on Wednesday morning, as he was getting near the end, he had been talking about Danny. He did a really interesting thing about Danny planning things instead of doing things spontaneously. I thought that was really good. But then at the very end, after talking about Danny nonstop for 30, 40 minutes, he changed the focus to the women. And he talked about what they've been through and all the things that they've had to do. And nobody signs up for this kind of thing. And that what motivates them, the defense wants you to think they're motivated by money. The only thing that motivates them is seeking justice. and that you can give them that justice. Find him guilty, you have given them that justice. And it was, I think, a really powerful final message to them about the power they have in relation to these women. So again, I'll say, I really feel like the DAs did about as good as they could have, both in presenting a case this time and wrapping it up with their closing statements. But, these are tough cases. There's a lot of elements to it. And, to me, I feel like having them play back that video suggests there's some disagreement back there. And there's a couple different sides, and one side wants to convince the other side. And
wow. Yeah, it's hard to say which side even is going this time. Last time we found out after the fact, of course, but it's, this is a tougher one. And I couldn't agree with you more. I just don't know what else they could have put in there, except maybe this might segue over to the next thing I wanted to ask you about, which was that blog post about that knowledge report.
Right. So listen, Leah and I actually talked about some of this evidence sort of indirectly on a podcast we did during the first trial. And Leah and I talked about how frustrating it was for us knowing that there's evidence the jury's not going to see.
Yeah.
Jury evidence about Scientology's handling of this incident. And specifically, we're talking about some documents associated with Jane Doe 1's mother. I've said repeatedly that everyone should look at this amazing 2019 Daily Beast story by Amy Zimmerman, where she discussed the contents of those letters from Jane Doe 1's mother. Absolutely amazing story she did.
Mm-hmm.
And I've always wanted to get a look at those letters. I've just heard about them for years. That what happened was, after this incident involving Danny Masterson, a celebrity in Scientology, and Jane Doe 1, Scientology does what Scientology does and brought them all in for interrogations.
That's right.
Right?
Yep.
They interrogated Masterson, they interrogated Jane Doe 1, they wrote reports, knowledge reports were written by people, knowledge reports on each other. There's this mass of information that Scientology's sitting on. One of the persons that got access to all of that was Jane Doe 1's mother. She read those reports, and then she wrote a letter to David Miscavige, leader of the church, talking about how unhappy she was about how this was all being handled.
That's right.
And in that letter, which we now have seen because Leah made it public on her Substack, thank goodness, are these amazing, if this woman's to be believed, she could see that Danny was admitting to a lot of these things in, the pillow and other, things that we now know so well from that attack. Danny was apparently admitting to those in his interrogations, even if he denied that it was anything but consensual. So this was I know the DAs wanted to get this information in front of the jury. Just a couple of weeks ago, I was talking to the DAs in the hallway and said, hey, are those Jane Doe 1 mom documents going to get in this time? And they looked at me and said, how? How can we do it? What they're talking about is that Jane Doe 1's mother herself, as Leah explained in her piece, Jane Doe 1's mother herself is staying loyal to Scientology.
Right.
Siding with Scientology over her own daughter in a case where her daughter was violently raped.
It's mind-boggling, and I address this.
You're going to explain this better than I can.
Well, I tell you, this is the kind of thing that even boggles me. I go, because it's very clear that it requires a true moral dilemma and outrage to cause the cognitive dissonance to blow a person's head up to exit Scientology. And this is exactly the kind of thing that you would think would blow that sky high in a mother's head. And clearly, when she wrote this report, the tone of that report is not nice. It is not subservient. It is not, dear Mr. Miscavige, could you please? She is straight up saying this whole thing. She actually used the word squirrely. This whole thing has been squirrely. That's like a swear word. You might as well say they fucking foobarred this thing every which way you could. She is not a happy camper in March 2004 when this report comes out. What could they have done between now and then? Well, I can tell you they could have done a lot of things to twist her thinking around, and including an awful lot of security checking of her personally, the mother. And it gaslights you, man. It's like concentrated fucking gaslighting. It really is. It'll
and
turn
this
night and
starts to
day.
give you and this starts to give you a hint of what these women have been through.
Yeah,
And this is some
exactly.
of the stuff that I've known that I haven't really been able to talk about, but that Leah's helping make public. Is that, think about Jane Doe 1, she's not only dealing with Danny and the DAs and having to go on the witness stand while trying to remain a Jane Doe and that doesn't want her identity out, but she's got this whole thing with her mother going on.
Right.
That the DA wants to call her mother and the mother's not cooperating. Just think about all this is what I wanted people to understand about what these women are going through. It's incredible.
Exactly. Tremendous. Just tremendous. And plus, of course, they have not been able or been allowed to discuss any of the real specifics of the fair gaming, except what slips out here and there. But we know, there's computer, there's cyber stalking, there's, in your face stalking, there's the surveillance, the Sabrosa surveillance. I mean, it's every level with this, and it's just awful, awful,
Yeah.
awful.
Awful.
Okay. Well, that's
and
that.
let me just give you one more update from court.
Yeah, please.
The one other update from court I have for you is that the evidentiary hearing for the discovery leak issue with Vicky Poboreski has been scheduled for May 31st.
Okay.
Now it'll be interesting because, like, if we have a hung jury again in a mistrial, it'll be weird to then come back to court a week later and deal with this evidentiary hearing. But it's an important issue, and that is, how did all this incredible personal evidence that the DA by law had to share with the defense after redacting it then end up in the hand of the Church of Scientology? This is a serious security issue that they're going to hash out in this evidentiary hearing on May 31st. So I knew you'd be interested to hear that. Yeah, I believe the DA and the court, the judge, are really determined to get to the bottom of that. However, whatever the jury decides to do.
That's right.
So that's May 31st.
Good. Yeah, because the wrongness of that act has nothing to do with whether Danny is guilty or innocent of what he's been accused of.
That's right.
It's just, and with Marcy's Law thrown in, it's criminal.
Yep.
So, yeah. Okay, a couple other points you reported on I thought worth mentioning real fast. Nancy Cartwright. You had that little cute cartoon done of Nancy. Nancy, what did she top? 10 million, 20 million something donations to Scientology?
Well, you know, Chris, that I love Impact Magazine because that's the magazine Scientology puts out where they celebrate their whales, that I call them, the big donors. The people end up in Impact for only donating 50,000 or so, but this is where we learn who are the people donating $1 million or more. Those are the ones I focus on. Mm-hmm. And there was a new Impact magazine just came out recently about a New Year's event at the Fort Harrison Hotel where they celebrated the people that have given these huge amounts. And one of them was Nancy Cartwright. And I remember the last time I reported on Nancy, when Nancy got a trophy 4 years ago, it was for cumulative donation. Cumulative, keep in mind, it might have taken years to get there, but cumulative donations to the IAS. There's other ways to give, but just the IAS, she had donated $17.5 million in 2019. And that became a big news item. So when I saw she got another trophy, Chris, I knew this was going to be big again. I went to I have a whole rundown of how I've associated these numbers. I've checked it with former IAS administrators. They say my numbers are, if anything, conservative. So now she's been named Patron Excalibur with honors, which translates to a cumulative total of $21 million Nancy Cartwright has given just to the IAS, the International Association of Scientologists, which is their membership organization, and David Miscavige's legal slush fund.
That's right.
She's given millions more. She's given millions more for the Valley Ideal Org.
That's right.
And probably other Ideal Org programs. Yep. But just to the IAS, she got another big, gigantic trophy for $21 million of total giving. So I put that up on Monday last week, along with the other people that were $1 million or more, including Tom Cummins is up to $40 million, and Trish Duggan is somewhere over $300 million, insane amounts of money.
Oh my God.
And it had another picture of Nancy's talking about how this was the greatest acknowledgement of her entire life. Within a day, and you have to understand how crazy this is, Chris, because Scientology is usually very slow if they act at all. But within a day, Gary Soder, one of their attorneys, on behalf of the IASA, the organization that runs the IAS, filed a DMCA takedown request with Substack, and Substack pulled down my post.
Right.
I wasn't happy about that, and I thought about fighting it because I think I could make a case that a cropped photo from a magazine of such newsworthiness would count as fair use under the copyright law. But I decided I just don't have the resources right now to do that. So instead, I turned to my friend, Chad Esley. Chad's this great cartoonist in, I think, Oregon. And he, several times in the past, has helped me out with this particular situation. I asked him to create his own cartoon version of that photo showing Nancy Cartwright, David Miscavige, and her new trophy. The Church of Scientology cannot copyright Chad's cartoon. So I was able to put the story back up on Saturday, all the original text from my story, but I replaced that image. And then with the other images, I replaced with bowling trophies because we always call them bowling trophies. So It's just a way. I don't want Scientology to be able to remove stories from the internet that they don't like. So this is my way of getting it back up there so people can see what Nancy Cartwright is, what they're apparently sensitive about. But I mean, these amounts are just so incredible.
Oh, they're staggering. They're staggering. And this is on top of service sales, like Nancy's bridge to total freedom through OTA. She's OTA. That's another million or two over there.
Right.
And then you have the IAS is just basically straight donations as you can give. She's getting nothing back for that except these bowling trophies. And but let's actually speak to what is she really getting. She's getting reputation. She's getting ego boosts. Right? She walks into a room of Scientologists.
Inside
Scientology, they are falling all over themselves to acknowledge and applaud her everywhere she goes. And that's the real feels that you're getting for this. Somebody asked me, how do other Scientologists think about these whales?
Yeah.
And I said they think of them as heroes.
Right.
They do. Well, we used to think about them as the people who were pouring the fuel in the gas tank of Scientology.
Well, do you hear this thing I often do about her, that she's also an enforcer? There are certain celebrities, Jenna Elfman is one, Nancy Cartwright, and Tom Cruise. They're not just dedicated celebrities to the cause, but they're known as enforcers. They will go up to another celebrity and say, have you given lately? How much have you given lately? Why didn't I see you at the last event?
Yep.
That's what I've heard. That's what I've heard about her and the others.
I could absolutely see that in her. Of course, Jenna's infamous. And how many babies have you killed? And then and Tom, of course, we have Mark Headley's stories about him and how he rounded up all the celebrities and demanded they get to it, or he was going to ruin their careers. So so Tom is definitely at the top of that list. And these guys get on a real high horse about this. If I can do it, anybody can do it, kind of thing, and all of that. So, but they are infinitely rewarded in that world for what they're doing. And let's remember, these are human beings. These are people, and they are all in on this.
Yeah.
So they're just as fanatical as anybody else can be. Just because they have a job that entertains people doesn't mean they can't be just as far down the extremist mindset as anybody else. And that's where these guys, these three we named, for example, that's where they live. So they really do think Scientology is the most important world they're part of.
Yeah.
Now, there was also, you had another report from Alana Warrens, who was that private investigator. And this has been a real interesting gold mine of insight into the day-to-day ground, boots on the ground look of how the fair gaming gets done by somebody who's whistleblowing on it. Any comment on that?
Yeah. So she first reached out to me and we did her initial story where she described how she got into this career and how she ended up following various, Amy Scobie and then Mike Rinder. Then I asked her, she sent me specific data, actual reports, and you could see what it was like, minute by minute. The one I thought people would be interested in was the July 4th, 2010 was the weekend or whatever when Marty Rathbun and Monique Rathbun got married at Mike Rinder's house. And then they had a 4th of July picnic for independent Scientologists.
That's right. I remember that.
And so Alana and others were just parked outside with binoculars and cameras with long lenses, just recording everybody coming and going. So I wanted people to see what that report looked like and some of her photos. So that was the second piece. And then for the third piece, she had talked about how her first assignment was Amy and Matt, and I just said, well, do you have any details about what you were doing? And so she sent me another sort of her own piece of writing talking about being across the street with cameras aimed into Amy and Matt's apartment. I mean, Chris, you and I have both been targeted for this kind of shit from Scientology before. I have to admit that I always figured, yeah, okay, I know when I'm out on the sidewalk, they can legally take pictures of me. When I'm driving around town, they can legally follow me around. I don't think Miscavige is wasting a lot of money on somebody like me, but I know it's possible and it's legal. But they're not going to aim cameras into my house. Right. I always assume they're not going to go that far. And then to find out from Alana, oh yeah, we could see all the way into their kitchen. We could see what they were doing. It's like, oh my God.
Oh yeah, absolutely. As intrusive as possible. Whatever they can get away with, they will. Absolutely.
And then the other detail that Matt was trying to run a used furniture kind of a business out of a warehouse. He'd go and look for good used furniture and then turn it around, sell it on Craigslist or eBay or whatever. And they purposely would go out and buy things before he could. They were actively trying to destroy his business.
Yeah.
And I know they were trying to do it to Robert Almblad and Mike Rinder, but I don't know. It's just amazing to me to have an actual former Scientology private investigator just spell it out like that. So I figured people would be interested in that. And I showed Amy and Matt this material to see if they wanted to say anything. Amy really took the high road and just said, look, nothing's going to stop us, and I really admire her for doing that.
Yeah, big time. They have been, I don't know, courageous, stalwart. I mean, they're kind of amazing.
They are.
They really kind of are in what they've had to put up with. That whole crew, I mean, all the people who were basically in the Going Clear documentary, a bunch of the people who were in the Scientology in the Aftermath show at some point or another have been at the receiving end of this bullshit from Scientology.
Right.
And it's ruined them utterly. It's Hubbard's quote writ large. That is all that they are about.
Yeah, but they haven't stopped them. So
yeah, it's crazy. It's absolutely crazy. Okay. We've covered a lot of material here today. This is quite a week.
Yeah.
And we're obviously fingers crossed. I mean, it kind of has to be, I think, that we're going to get a verdict one way or the other this next week on this thing.
I'll just remind people that in the first trial, they deliberated for 3 days, and then we had the Thanksgiving break.
Right.
Came back, had to replace a couple jurors because of COVID. Then we had 3 more days. On the third day, they told the judge they were hopelessly deadlocked, and we got a hung jury.
Right.
So we've had 3 days now. This jury, I would expect something to start happening Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday. I mean, something one way or the other. And I hope this jury is able to come to some conclusions and not leave us hanging again.
Exactly. And 2 out of 3, 3 out of 3. That's what we need on this.
For the DAs need 2 guilties out of the 3 charges in order to send Danny Masterson to prison.
Right.
If he's found guilty of 2, he's looking at 30 years to life in prison. If he's guilty of all 3, he's looking at 45 years to life in prison. If he's guilty of 1, the statute of limitations kills it, and he's not going to prison.
That's right.
They need 2 or more for Danny to go to prison. And, I mean, they could acquit him. I mean, they could decide he's just not guilty at all. But last time we had 3 hung jury, 3 that they couldn't reach verdicts on all 3.
That's right.
We'll see.
We'll see what happens. All right, man. Keep fighting the good fight. And folks out there, of course, thanks for coming around and watching. Obviously, Tony's Substack address is right there. You can sign up for that. Please do.
Also, when it's verdict watch time, you should also watch my Twitter because Tony Ortega 94, because some stuff may come out on Twitter a little bit before Substack, especially if we're talking verdicts and that kind of thing. So
Right.
that's where you may get the very first word on Twitter before you get a Substack story. But keep watch on both. It's going to be nervous time this next few days.
Big time. Big time. All right, guys. And of course, if you're not subscribed to the channel, please do so. And with that, I will see you guys soon. Bye-bye.